Now for business news, and for that I'm joined by Stephen Carroll. Hello, Stephen.
Hi, Annette.
And you're staying with the latest on that oil pipeline hack in the US.
That's right. US President Joe Biden says the White House will be beefing up efforts to combat ransomware attacks after the Colonial Pipeline was shut down on Friday. The operators of the country's biggest oil link say they're hoping to restore service by the end of this week. The FBI says a criminal gang known as DarkSide was involved in the attack. That group issuing a statement denying that it was connected to a foreign government and saying they regret creating problems for society. President Biden, meanwhile, says there's no evidence that Russia was involved. Camille Nedelec has the story.
Drivers queue up to fill their tanks amid fears that the East Coast could run out of fuel. Some had been to several petrol stations only to find them empty, as experts urged consumers not to panic buy.
It's unbelievable. When I was riding today, I thought that it was a catastrophe coming. I'm like, what's going on? I seen all these cars parked everywhere, and I was just like, OMG, I have to fill my tank up.
The shortages come in the wake of a shutdown of the Colonial Pipeline on Friday, which supplies 45% of fuel to the US East Coast, after its IT systems were held to ransom by a group of hackers. To counter shortages, the Biden administration moved to lift restrictions on road transport of fuel.
We're prepared to take additional steps depending on how quickly the company is able to bring its pipeline back to full operational capacity. And my administration will be pursuing a global effort of ransomware attacks by transnational criminals who often use global money laundering networks to carry them out.
An Interpol report last year warned that hackers are increasingly targeting larger organisations and critical infrastructure with ransomware, as the amount they can demand is far higher.
I think it is a wake-up call. Every utility, every large refinery, probably in the United States and on other continents, is going to have meetings and make sure that they're protected against something like this.
Colonial Pipeline says it hopes to restore the bulk of its operations by the end of this week.
Now, the pipeline shutdown, as we were just hearing, did lead to fuel shortages at some filling stations, and there are concerns that prices may spike in the coming days, particularly as travel is picking up around America. On the markets, though, the price of crude oil hasn't really been affected by the shutdown. Oil experts say that's because there isn't an overall shortage of oil, just logistical issues and getting it to filling stations in some cases. WTI and Brent are both trading lower today. Let's take a look at what's happening on the stock markets next for you. And we've got sharp slumps on European markets today. This over fears of rising inflation in the United States. Investors concerned that a spike in consumer prices could see central banks roll back some of their stimulus to the economy. That's despite repeated assurances to the contrary from the Federal Reserve. That's the picture on the European markets a short time ago. Sharp falls across London, Paris and Frankfurt. Now, the amount of renewable energy produced last year rose at its fastest pace in 2 decades. The International Energy Agency says that new renewable electricity production rose by 10% last year. The jump was mainly in wind and solar power, and particularly was driven by a rush to complete projects before government subsidies ended in China, the United States and Vietnam. The IEA is forecasting similar jumps in renewable energy production this year and in 2022. Turning next to the business of vaccines, and Novavax is delaying plans to roll out its COVID-19 jab. The US biotechnology company says it won't be applying for authorization in the United States or the European Union until after June. That news sending the company's shares tumbling on Monday. Novavax's one-shot jab is particularly important for the COVAX program to supply developing countries with vaccines. The company is also developing a combined flu and COVID vaccine. The French government's financial aid to the tourism industry has totalled €28 billion so far. Revenues in the sector were down by 50% last year, according to the French Central Bank. The country's tourism minister says that government financial support will continue as the recovery will be gradual for the industry. He was speaking as the government begins a campaign to attract visitors from neighbouring countries in Europe this summer. Meanwhile, travel restrictions and worries over COVID have pushed more buyers to invest in their own mobile holiday home. Sales of camper vans soared in France last year.
holiday on the open road, an increasingly tempting investment for holidaymakers. Camper vans can cost as much as a small house, but sales of the vehicles were up by a quarter in France last year, while rentals also saw double-digit growth. Some people were lured by the idea of pandemic-proof, socially distant travels.
Plus de liberté, plus de sécurité. Voilà, on n'a pas à se poser de questions où on va aller manger, si les restaurants vont être ouverts, si les hôtels vont être ouverts, si les frontières vont être ouvertes. Donc c'est ce qui a vraiment précipité mon achat.
That means extra work too for manufacturers. This camper van factory in the west of France employs 200 people. Each van is 100 hours of work, and 10 are completed each day.
Ce qu'on voit, c'est qu'on n'arrête pas, quoi.
The firm now operates 7 days a week and is looking to hire 30 more people.
Ça fait 2 ans que je suis ici. Ça fait 7 mois que je suis embauché. Et bah, c'était plutôt facile de trouver ici. J'habite à côté. Et puis, ouais, c'est une bonne chose, franchement, ouais.
Factory bosses need all kinds of skill sets.
On recherche des menuisiers, des agenceurs, des plombiers, des électriciens et aussi on recrute des personnes que l'on va former à nos méthodes de travail.
Most of the new camper vans in France are made in the country, so the post-pandemic van boom is good news for local industry.
Finally, from me to a legal battle over UGG boots. A federal appeals court in the United States has rejected an attempt by an Australian company to remove the US trademark for the sheepskin-lined boots. Now, in Australia, the term UGG isn't trademarked, and it's used as a generic description for the boots which have been made since the 1930s. But an American company, Deckers, has trademarked UGG Australia, and it sells the boots in more than 130 countries around the world. Australian Leather, which makes the boots down under, has challenged their claim to the name, but judges rejected their argument. The Aussie firm's owner says that he'll take the battle to the US Supreme Court. He says UGG should be protected as a generic term like champagne or feta. Do you have strong opinions about Uggs, Annette?
Well, they were made or created in my home state, but I have never owned a pair.
Neither have I, but maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll take to it.
Maybe the time has come. Thanks for that. That's Stephen Carroll with the day's business news. I'll be back after a short break, so in the meantime, do stay with us here on France 24.